The courtroom air hummed with bored certainty. Marcus Sterling's lawyer was finishing his patronizing summary, calling for a swift, favorable division of assets. The judge adjusted her glasses, ready to rule. Then, the oak doors at the back swung open. Not with a slam, but with a soft, decisive whisper. A silver-haired man in an impeccable suit walked in, followed by two others. A sharp gasp came from the plaintiff's table. The man leaned toward the bailiff, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Pardon the interruption. My client, Elena Vance Sterling, has new documentation for the court." In the rarefied air 70 stories above Manhattan, where the city's ceaseless roar faded into a distant subservient hum, Marcus Sterling presided over his kingdom. The corner office of Sterling Capital was a temple to calibrated power. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a staggering panorama of Central Park and the skyline beyond, the morning sun glinting off chrome and polished mahogany. Here Marcus was not just a man, he was a hedge fund titan, a modern-day Midas whose touch turned market volatility into generational wealth. He controlled billions in assets, a network of political influence that stretched to Washington, and the fates of the hundreds who worked in the gleaming tower below him. But his most cherished, unexamined control was over his wife, Elena. He had met her a decade ago at the firm, when she was simply Elena Vance, a preternaturally gifted quantitative analyst from MIT. She had a mind that saw patterns in chaos, a quiet intensity that Marcus initially mistook for shyness. He was drawn to her sharp beauty and her unsettling silence, which he interpreted as awe. He courted her not as an equal, but as a prized acquisition. He was the star portfolio manager, the charismatic dealmaker, she was the brilliant but background engine. When they married, he seamlessly translated this dynamic into their personal life. He plucked her from the bullpen, as he proudly told friends at their Hamptons wedding, and installed her in a gilded Fifth Avenue penthouse, a masterpiece of interior design he had commissioned without her input. It was her new station, her trophy case. To Marcus, Elena became the most elegant and serene of his possessions. She was the perfectly composed hostess at his dinner parties, pouring wine for senators and laughing softly at the right moments. She was the stunning arm candy at galas, her silence reflecting well on his own volubility. He provided her with unlimited black credit cards, a driver, memberships to the most exclusive clubs, everything a woman in her position could possibly need. He never asked how she spent her days, content in the knowledge that she was shopping, lunching, or overseeing the staff in their homes in Aspen and Palm Beach. When he'd glimpse her in her private study, bathed in the blue light of her computer screens, he'd pat her shoulder absently. "Tinkering again, darling?" he'd say, a fond dismissal in his voice. He believed her work was a nostalgic hobby, a way to fill the hours, a few lines of code to keep that formidable mind from getting bored. The idea that it could be anything more, anything consequential, never breached the fortress of his arrogance. His world was one of overt, thunderous power. His days were a symphony of decisive action, barking orders into the silver Bloomberg terminal, swinging billion-dollar positions with a phone call, his voice a weapon that could make junior analysts flinch. He read the Wall Street Journal and Politico with the focus of a general studying battlefield maps. He believed with unshakable conviction that he was the sole architect and defender of their empire. His intelligence, his gut instincts, his relentless drive were the pillars supporting their astronomical wealth, their social prominence, their very identity. The Sterling name, now synonymous with affluence and influence, was his creation. Elena's role in his narrative was decorative and supportive. She was the calm to his storm, the soft landing after his brutal days. He loved her in his way, but it was the love of a curator for his finest piece, a love premised on ownership and control. He made the decisions, where they vacationed, what charity board she would grace, which art collections to invest in. He managed their fortune with a proprietary zeal, yet there was a pronoun he defined unilaterally. The money was his to grow, his to allocate, his to bestow upon her as a reward for her compliance and beauty. This illusion was the bedrock of his existence. It allowed him to stride through the world with an unassailable confidence. At charity auctions, he would bid astronomical sums with a casual wave, knowing Elena would smile her gentle smile beside him. In boardrooms, he would dominate conversations, his eyes occasionally flicking to a photo of them on his desk, a reminder of the perfect life he had built. The penthouse, the art, the social cachet, the respect of his peers, all of it was a testament to his power. Elena was part of the exquisite decor, a living element of his success story. He never noticed the specifics, the secure, encrypted line on her desk phone, the occasional late-night video conferences she took in hushed tones after he'd retired, the way certain tech magnates at their parties would seek her out for a brief, intense conversation he was too busy to join. He was deaf to the subtle shift in her demeanor over the years, the quiet focus hardening into something more formidable, the soft-spoken replies containing a new, unyielding steel. Her silence, which he mistook for passive acceptance, had become a vast and strategic quiet, an ocean of thought and action moving beneath a placid surface. Marcus Sterling's kingdom was built on a fundamental, catastrophic error. He believed the foundation was his own brilliance, his force of will. He never once considered that the true foundation, the source of the very ground he stood upon, was the quiet woman in the study he never entered, the architect whose invisible blueprint he had mistaken for a simple sketch. His control was not just an illusion, it was a veil about to be ripped away, revealing that he was not the king, but a tenant in a castle he never knew how to build. The epicenter of the true Sterling fortune was not the manicured chaos of Marcus's trading floor, but a serene, sunlit room down the hall from their master bedroom. Elena's study was a study in minimalist precision. White oak floors, a single abstract painting of intersecting lines, and a long sleek desk holding a constellation of high-resolution monitors. Here, in the quiet hours before dawn and long after Marcus had fallen asleep, Elena Vance Sterling was not a wife, not a hostess, not a trophy. She was a creator. What Marcus dismissed as tinkering was the meticulous construction of a digital leviathan. For 7 years, Elena had been building Vortex. It began as a theoretical framework in her MIT thesis, a novel approach to neural networks that could parse global sentiment not from financial news, but from the chaotic, real-time slurry of satellite imagery, shipping lane traffic, social media seismology, and geopolitical chatter. It was an AI designed to see the unseen connections, to predict market movements not through traditional analysis, but by sensing the tremors in the world's subconscious. While Marcus and his ilk played chess, Vortex was analyzing the weather, the friction of the board, and the heartbeat of the players. Her pseudonym, E. Vance, became a whispered legend in two worlds. In the venture capital circles of Sand Hill Road, Vance was the enigmatic, unreachable genius behind the most potent fintech tool in a generation. Rumors swirled. Vance was a reclusive collective of ex-KGB hackers. Vance was a runaway prodigy from a secret government lab. Vance was an AI that had built itself. In the cavernous trading pits of Wall Street, a license to Vortex's predictive analytics was the ultimate edge. Its API delivered forecasts of staggering, unsettling accuracy, its code a locked black box that even the most curious clients could not penetrate. Subscriptions started at 7 figures annually, with a waiting list long enough to circle the block. Elena managed it all from her ivory tower. She had structured the company, Vance Predictive Systems, with layers of Delaware-registered LLCs and a small, fiercely loyal team of developers and a razor-sharp CEO, a former colleague who knew her only as E. They communicated via encrypted channels. Her board meetings were virtual, her voice digitally modulated. Her profits did not flow into the joint accounts Marcus monitored with such possessiveness. Instead, they funneled into a Byzantine network of trusts and offshore vehicles, the capital then strategically, invisibly, seeded into the very markets and funds Marcus believed he dominated. The irony was absolute and exquisite. The fortune Marcus so arrogantly managed, the portfolio he spent his days obsessively tweaking, boasting of its returns at cocktail parties, was fundamentally buoyed by Elena's invisible hand. The lucky bet on Brazilian commodities that had saved his fourth quarter? A market movement Vortex had flagged 8 weeks prior. The catastrophic short position he'd narrowly avoided after a hunch? A risk Vortex had calculated and red-flagged, its warning appearing as a seemingly random analyst note from a boutique firm she quietly owned. She was not just his wife, she was the unseen market maker, the ghost in the machine of his own fund. Every luxury that reinforced his illusion of supreme providence was, in fact, a dividend from her intellect. The penthouse? Purchased with capital gains from an early Vortex beta windfall. The modern art collection he loved to show off? acquired through a gallery owned by one of her trusts. The donations that secured their family name on hospital wings and museum plaques? Written from accounts he could not see. She lived inside the apparatus of his ego, funding the very stage upon he performed his mastery. Her motivation was not malice, but initially preservation, and then quiet emancipation. The first lines of Vortex's code were written in the lonely aftermath of a party, where Marcus had publicly corrected her on a point of monetary policy, his tone patrician and dismissive. The project became her secret sanctuary, a world where her mind was sovereign. As his condescension solidified into the bedrock of their relationship, her creation grew in power and scope. It was her intellectual child, a testament to everything he refused to see in her. She watched him sometimes, from across a crowded room, as he held forth on the brutal genius of the markets. A faint, unreadable smile would touch her lips. He spoke of pressure and instincts, of the gut feeling that separated kings from pawns. He had no idea that the gut feeling he credited for his survival was, more often than not, the downstream echo of her algorithm's billion calculations per second, subtly manipulating the currents he believed he alone could navigate. Elena was the silent architect, not just of a software empire, but of the very reality Marcus inhabited. She had built the financial foundations of his kingdom while he was busy hanging the banners. She tolerated his dominion because it cost her nothing but a little patience. Her real power, vast and detached, operated on a plane far above his comprehension. The penthouse was not her cage, but her observation deck. And from this vantage point, she waited, not for a confrontation, but for the inevitable moment when his blind, blustering world would intersect with the elegant, formidable world she had built. The collision was not a matter of if, but when. And when it came, it wouldn't be announced with a shout. It would be whispered in a line of flawless code, proven in a stock ticker, and finalized in the paralyzing silence of a truth too monumental to bear. The Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dendor was awash in the soft glow of 1,000 candles, the ancient Egyptian stones serving as a stark, silent witness to a modern unraveling. The annual Future Horizons Gala was the pinnacle of the philanthropic season, where old money met new tech, and billionaires performed their benevolence. Marcus Sterling was in his element, a shark navigating familiar, champagne-filled waters. He had a target, Liam Thorne, the mercurial, hoodie-wearing CEO of Apex Capital, a quant fund so successful it made Marcus's operation look almost quaint. Securing Thorne as a strategic investor was the final piece of his year's ambition. He spotted Thorne near the reflecting pool, holding court with a small group. Marcus adjusted his Tom Ford tuxedo jacket, a gesture of preparation he'd perfected. He moved in, hand extended, his most winning transactional smile already in place. Liam. Marcus Sterling. We've been playing phone tag. That Myanmar play you made last quarter was a work of art, he began, his voice dripping with curated camaraderie. Thorne, a man in his 30s with the distracted intensity of someone perpetually listening to a higher frequency signal, turned. He gave Marcus a brief, polite nod that didn't reach his eyes. Sterling. Yes. Brutal markets. His gaze, however, slid past Marcus's shoulder, locking onto a point across the room. A spark of recognition, no of acute interest, flared in his eyes. Excuse me, Thorne said, not as an apology but as a statement of fact. I must speak with her. Before Marcus could process the dismissal, Thorne was striding away, cutting through the crowd with singular purpose. Puzzled but not yet alarmed, Marcus turned, assuming Thorne was heading for a senator or a Silicon Valley legend. Instead he watched, his smile freezing then crumbling, as Thorne came to a stop directly in front of Elena. His Elena, who stood serene in a column of simple black silk, her only jewelry a single, sharp diamond at her throat. She had been speaking with the museum director, but turned as Thorne approached. What happened next unfolded in slow motion, a seismic event masquerading as a quiet conversation. Thorne did not offer a casual social greeting. He gave a slight, almost reverential nod. His voice, which had been so dismissive moments before, carried a note of unmistakable urgency and respect that cut through the ambient murmur. Ms. Vance. The name hung in the air, foreign and yet devastatingly familiar. Vance. Marcus felt the first cold trickle of dread. Vortex is everything, Thorne continued, leaning in slightly, his words clear in the sudden pocket of silence that seemed to envelop them. The small group nearby had stopped to listen, sensing a shift in the room's gravity. The beta data for the geopolitics module is beyond anything we simulated. When can we discuss the next phase? My team is ready to move. Name the terms. Elena offered a small, professional smile. It was a smile Marcus had never seen, not warm, not wifely, but cool, authoritative, and utterly in command. Liam. The data is promising. My COO will schedule a secure conference for Tuesday. The terms, she said, her voice low and steady, are non-negotiable. As you know. It was not a question. It was the calm dictate of a sovereign. The world did not so much explode as it simply inverted. The truth did not detonate with a bang. It crystallized, a shard of absolute terrifying clarity piercing the core of Marcus's being. Ms. Vance. Vortex. My C. Non negotiable. The disparate fragments of a decade, her quiet hours, the blue glow of her screens, the deferential nods from men he could never quite win over, snapped into a horrifying, perfect picture. The hobby was the engine of the age. The powerless wife was the architect. Vance was Elena. A visceral silence radiated out from their little group. Faces, CEOs, financiers, titans of industry he'd spent his life trying to impress, turned toward Elena with dawning comprehension and naked fascination. Whispers coiled through the room like smoke. That's Vance. She's Sterling's wife. He didn't know? How could he not know? Marcus stood utterly still. The champagne flute in his hand felt impossibly heavy. He saw not the room, but the horrific architecture of his own ignorance. Every arrogant boast, every patronizing pat on her shoulder, every decision he'd made for them played back on a vicious, silent loop. The fortune he'd managed with such smug pride was a provincial allowance, a shadow play funded by the vast, invisible empire she owned. He had been a petty governor, proudly polishing the doorknobs in a castle whose deed was in her name, whose very foundations were built from her code. His reign, his entire identity as a provider and a king, evaporated in that humid, candlelit air. There was no courtroom drama, no screaming fit, no property to bitterly divide. The divorce was finalized in that moment, in the understanding that passed through the elite crowd. The real marriage, of power, of intellect, of true creation, had never existed. He had been married to an idea of her, while she had been married to her creation, generously allowing him to live in its reflected light. He didn't lose a wife that night. He lost his narrative. He lost his status as a self-made titan. He lost the unquestioning respect of the room, which had now permanently shifted its focus to the woman in black silk. Most profoundly, he lost the ground beneath his feet, the false bedrock of his own supremacy that she had, for years quietly, indifferently, held aloft. As he watched Liam Thorne, one of the most powerful men in finance, listen to his wife with the focus of a devoted student, Marcus Sterling finally understood. He was not the king in this story. He had never been. He was merely a man who had mistaken the architect for a piece of the scenery, and was now left standing, utterly alone, in the breathtaking empty palace of his own delusion. The only sound was the distant clink of crystal, and the deafening roar of his world turning to dust. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more stories from Courtroom Drama.